Welcome back, folks. Meteorologist Hunter McCullough here for Northern News Now. Part 2 of this video. So the first part we talked about the frost dates. We talked about our first average date of seeing some measurable snowfall. Now we're going to take into account all that we talk about when we break down the winter forecast. What goes into making the winter forecast? What do we look at when it comes to the winter forecast? When do we make the winter forecast as well? So there's a lot to talk about in regards to that, and that's what part 2 of this video is all about. Enjoy. Hey there, folks. Meteorologist Hunter McCullough here for Northern News Now. In today's video, we're going to kind of do a preview here of the winter forecast coming up, talking about what we look for as meteorologists here in the Northland for making our winter forecast. A lot of different factors go into making this winter forecast. We haven't made it yet. We're still analyzing all the data. It takes a lot to go through, and we only really have 8 hours in a day to be also forecasting for the immediate future and looking at the winter forecast. So it takes a little bit of time. Also, you can't make it too far out in advance. So you see these different publications like the Farmer's Almanac or anything else, you see this early out making predictions on the winter. I wouldn't put too much stock in that because it really is too early to be talking about that winter forecast. We're going to likely be making ours in October. That's a more fitting time period to be making a winter forecast. But even still, it can get a little hairy when it comes to just the overall correctness of that forecast, and definitely Lake Superior has a huge factor in our winter forecast. But another portion that we look for, and you've heard this before, El Nino versus La Nina versus equal, not really either or. And this is what's known as the ENSO circulation. And what this is, it stands for El Nino Southern Oscillation, and it's a big factor when it comes to winter forecasting in our region. So I'll talk about what the forecast is for ENSO right now, and then I'll tell you what that means in just a second here. So we're looking at, for the first part, we are currently in ENSO neutral, meaning neither a La Nina or an El Nino is currently in place. We're seeing neutral, kind of right in between. However, a La Nina is expected to emerge here late this fall and into early winter. So the first part of winter, La Nina, relatively weak, and then we're expected to go back into ENSO neutral in the late winter. What does all that mean? Well, let's talk about this. We're not looking so much at the United States when it comes to this. We are looking at far away down to our southwest into the Pacific Ocean, particularly at the equator. What happens is we've got these global winds, trade winds, global circulations all over the place around the Earth that I can get more into in a future video about all of our global circulations. But we've got these trade winds at the equator that blow out of the east. So normally trade winds are blowing east to west, push warm surface waters towards Asia. We're looking at the temperature of the surface water at the Pacific Ocean at the equator. Sometimes those trade winds are stronger than usual, and they push that hot water further off to the west, which causes upwelling, which is when water from down below moves to the surface. That's when you see some cooler temperatures, because it's down below, replacing that warmer water that moved out. So what we have then, what we're looking for, is whether we have cooler than average or warmer than average surface temperatures at the equator in the Pacific Ocean. These both scenarios can impact how our winter will be with the circulation. It generally can dictate what the pattern is going to be in a good chunk of our winter, depending on what happens here. Does it always work? No, it does not always work, and it gets frustrating. There's a lot of other factors, but this is a big factor when it comes to winter forecasting. So again, we are expected to be in a La Nina. El Nino, by the way, for you folks out there that are curious, is when the trade winds are weaker, so we can see that warmer air creeping further off to the east, and then we've got warmer than average surface temperatures at the Pacific Ocean at the equator. What does that mean for us in the United States? Well, generally, this is generally, especially with stronger El Ninos and stronger La Ninas, we generally see here with La Nina, we see cooler than average temperatures. It does not necessarily dictate what we're going to see for snowfall. It mainly dictates in our region what our temperatures temperatures are going to overall be. So first part of winter, first half of winter, we're going to likely be cooler than average. And that's because, again, we're seeing that weak La Nina. Now, it's not a strong La Nina, so it's not necessarily going to be the rule for this, this winter, but it's something that we're going to take into account when we make our winter forecast. It might lean towards cooler than average for a good portion of this winter. So what does that mean for snowfall? Well, we also have that big lake, Lake Superior, and that really also helps dictate a lot of our snowfall, especially near Lake Superior, of course, with lake effect snow. So sometimes when you have an El Nino and you've got warmer than average temperatures in our region, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see less snow. Inland it can mean that, but towards the lake, well, that means that there's not going to be as much ice on Lake Superior. So we're going to have wide open water, so when you do have a cold spell, that does happen, even though that you're overall going to be warmer than average, you still can see really heavy lake effect snow develop. And so there's just a lot of factors that come into account with this forecast here. So we look for patterns. We look back at the past and we look at these different scenarios, and when was the last time that we saw a weak La Nina after another weak La Nina? We had a weak La Nina last winter and we didn't see really any snow. The year before that, we saw barely any snow as well. Our average is 90.2 inches. International fall, 73 inches. So both the past two winters have been below average by a lot, especially 2 years ago. But then, the year before that, we had the most snow that we've ever had on record here in Duluth. You remember that? 3 years ago, 140.1 inches here in Duluth. So we look for patterns in the past however many years that we have data, which goes back into the early 1900s, and we can definitely look back, and even late 1800s, but it gets a little hairy back then. Anyway, we're looking for patterns, and what pattern we think is going to match what is happening right now. And so that's kind of what we're doing right now, is we're analyzing the data, analyzing the ENSO forecast, La Nina, weak La Nina, thinking about what's going to happen with Lake Superior, what that means for Lake Superior. Does that mean like we're going to see more ice coverage on Lake Superior? That impacts our snow totals as well. So we've got a lot to think about when it comes to this forecast, and hopefully we're going to have that ready for you coming up in October, and I'll make another video about that when we go into the future here. But that's what we're looking for when it comes to a winter forecast. Thank you very much for listening.